Thank you very much for having me today. I must admit, I feel a little bit intimidated and honored to be on stage with so many wonderful people. I am a professor. I lived in China for 9 years, and I now live in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. As a professor, if any of you are thinking of taking a nap, now would be the time to do that. You may have heard that there's this trade war thing going on in the world that is gathering a lot of headlines. And I think one of the things that is so important to understand about what is going on here, we seem to be having a little problems, but I will hopefully let the tech guys get that figured out, is that one of the most important things in this trade war negotiation between China and the United States is a company called Huawei. Huawei is a company you may have heard about. They make networking gear and handsets, the smartphones that you carry around with you. But I think one of the things that is so lost in this, as we discuss the politics and Trump and China and all of this, is what is going on with China and Huawei's human rights record. China is the most surveilled country in the world. By the end of next year, it is estimated that there will be 1 camera for every 2 people in all of China. And that will be a 200% increase from where we're at now. And I just want you to stop and think about that for a minute. 1 camera for every 2 people. And in fact, in many parts of the country, it's actually significantly worse than that. If we think about Xinjiang, many of you may not even have heard of Xinjiang. In Xinjiang, they have more than 2.5 tracking devices for every citizen in the city of Urumqi. Tracking devices for our purposes here are everything from CCTV to handheld smartphones or body cameras on police that will facially recognize and keep records of citizens as they go about their day. In Xinjiang, even butcher's knives for cooking are identified and chained to the wall. People can't even use knives in Xinjiang. This is the type of repression that we're talking about. So how does this relate to Huawei? How does this relate to the trade war that we're talking about? When we think about China, we think about all the modern and wonderful things that they've done. If you've been to China, the tall buildings, the wonderful cities, the modern infrastructure. But China is really, at the same time, a techno-authoritarian state. This picture here was taken not far from my home in Shenzhen when I lived there for 9 years, and not far from the Huawei headquarters. At first, this picture may not look like anything extraordinary. However, if you look closer, you will see about 5 surveillance cameras on one side, and on the other side of the bus stop, there are just as many additional surveillance cameras. Each of those little balls has anywhere from 2 to 4 cameras. That means right there, we have probably about 20 to 40 cameras surveilling people as they take the bus. Now, what is important to note about this is that Huawei is the backbone of this entire techno-authoritarian state that they're building in China. From how the data is stored, to the facial recognition, to the gait recognition. Many of you may not even know that they can now recognize you by how you walk. And all of this data is being stored. For a long time, we had heard rumors about what was going on with Huawei. Dating back to the Clinton administration and then the Bush administration, many people were worried about what Huawei was doing. They had been linked in various news reports with everybody from the Taliban to Iran doing various nefarious things. I can tell you, North Korea does not have 4G companies to have a 4G infrastructure by itself. There had been many concerns about this, but we did not have a lot of hard data in the public domain to say, this is what we know Huawei is doing. Earlier this year, I was given a database of about millions of CVs, and out of that we were able to extract about 30 million CVs, or 30,000 individual CVs from Huawei. So what I was able to do is I was actually able to look inside what was going on with Huawei employees. What did they say they were doing? I'm no longer relying on governmental reports about what they say Huawei is doing. I'm no longer relying on a news article. I'm actually looking at what Huawei employees tell me that they are doing. This is a quantum leap from where we were understanding Huawei before. Now, before I jump into what Huawei specifically is doing, let me tell you what Huawei says they are. In today's China in 2019, Huawei insists that they are a private company. One of the first pieces of research I did about Huawei was something as simple as who owns Huawei. Now, Huawei will insist that they are a private company, but actually they are the same legal status as the Communist Youth League. I don't know anyone that says the Communist Youth League is a purely private enterprise driven by profit motives. Okay? So when we look at Huawei, we need to understand how closely linked to the communist state that they are. So I looked at a couple of things as I was sorting through this resume database of employees that would tell me what they are doing. What activities were they involved in? What countries did they work in? What projects were they working on? And most importantly, could I verify their identity? I needed to be able to verify their identity. I needed to be able to demonstrate through multiple sources that this person exists and they actually engaged in these works. So in a way, I was setting up my own Chinese human resources department, which for a professor is somewhat of a daunting task. What I found surprised, I think, even me. We found employees that worked at the same time they were working for Huawei. We found employees that were working for the People's Liberation Army Cyber Warfare Division. That doesn't sound like an employee of a purely profit-driven enterprise. We found employees that were stating that they were a representative of the Ministry of State Security, which is the primary intelligence gathering arm of the Chinese state. We found employees that I could tie back to known cases of IP theft and data interception around the world. These were employees that were putting themselves in known cases where we knew certain things to have taken place from other sources. Additionally, we have enormous number of cases of Huawei employees working with the Public Security Bureau in China to engage in various forms of human rights abuses and democratic oppression. Whether or not you believe President Trump or the trade war is irrelevant. We need to look at what Huawei is actually doing. So why does this matter for what we're talking about? According to Chinese law, all data has to be accessible to Chinese officials anytime they want it. Think about this. Think if the US government could walk into your smartphone and take whatever they want and throw you in jail for it. That's what we're talking about. Companies, individuals, it doesn't matter. And technology companies have to work with the Chinese government to do this, not just in China, around the world. Furthermore, the intelligence law requires that individuals and firms shall support, cooperate, and collaborate in national intelligence gathering. This creates a proactive obligation by individuals and firms to engage in this behavior around the world. So when Huawei says, no, we will not engage in this type of behavior, it is black letter law in China that they have to do that, and that they are actively doing that. And we have every reason to believe that they do. Huawei has many contracts in Xinjiang. Xinjiang is in western China. Xinjiang is a place of beauty. It is also a place of great horror today. Arguably, the worst human rights abuses in the world are taking place in Xinjiang today. They have imprisoned roughly 1 to 1.5 million Uyghurs simply for being Uyghurs. We know of more than 100 concentration camps that they have built. This is one of them right here. This is roughly a half to 2/3 of a square mile in size, holding thousands of people. Huawei forms the foundation for where this data is stored, for facial recognition, for working with police to identify people that they should target, censorship. Uyghurs are thrown in these prison camps now for even talking with someone overseas. Talking with someone overseas. How important is this in China and to Huawei? Let me give you a little bit of perspective. China spends more on domestic security, such as Huawei, than they do on external national security. To put that in perspective, the United States spends 4 times more on national security than they do on policing and incarceration. This is why we see this techno-authoritarian state coupled with a rapidly growing concentration camp system. This reaches into every aspect of life that we see. One man was recently jailed for complaining about the National Day Parade on social media. That's all he did. He complained about having to stay home and watch the National Day Parade, and he was imprisoned for a couple of weeks. This is what Huawei is engaging with. What is important to note about Huawei and the Chinese state is that there are no limits on this data. There are no limits. Just as we said, all data has to be accessible to Chinese officials at all times, and you can be imprisoned for it at any time. This is what is happening in China right now. I think this, to me, is one of the most striking things that has come out. Now, I want to say one piece of information about this. We do not know that this specifically is a Huawei camp, but we know that Huawei is involved with camps like this. This is a train full of Uyghurs that they're lining up to transport by train. You can see this taking place. This is what's happening right now in Xinjiang. It's very easy a lot of times to talk about never again. And sometimes they become cliched. But this is what Huawei is facilitating right now. The facial recognition. All of this data is being stored. People are being targeted. Not just in China, around the world. They are running a censorship campaign to target Uyghurs around the world, to instill great fear. I think one of the things that we need to think about as we're thinking about the importance of a company like Huawei and a company like China is a lot of times it's very easy to get caught up in our own specific divisions. I don't like President Trump. I don't like this European government. Fine. I'm not asking you to. I want you to look at what is going on with these Uyghurs. I want you to look at what daily life is like for Chinese that are scared to say anything on social media. I want you to look at the thousands of people that they're transporting by train. A lawyer who used to run war crimes tribunals for the United Nations ran an investigation, and there is overwhelming evidence of organ harvesting going on in China right now, specifically in Xinjiang. The issues we're talking about with Huawei that are front and center in this trade war and are being discussed widely in the news, it's not about economic competitiveness. It's about what are the limits of technology, what are we going to expect of China, and how are we going to allow Huawei into our lives. These are the types of images that should scare every one of us. Thank you very much.